Welcome to That's a Hard No, the podcast about learning to say no and set boundaries to live our best lives. I'm your host, Heather Drago. You may think, because of this podcast, that I'm a boundary setting expert, but I'm not. I'm an expert at struggling to set boundaries. But you know what? I'm working on it, and it is getting easier. Follow along with me as I learn from fellow strugglers and experts so that you too can start saying no without feeling fear, guilt, or FOMO.
You don't know where to go. Unfriendly applications got you feeling low. You're not sure what to do. Weight of expectations is coming down on you. There's a phrase you should know. Tastes so much sweeter than hello. That's a hard no.
So, Tala, what's the most important factor in a child's early speech and language development?
That's a really good question. A lot of it is their exposure to language around them. And so, how often a toddler is exposed to language is a very good predisposition for their later language skills. Now, that's not to say that it's indicative of later language skills, but a really big factor for early language development is being around language. I call it a language-rich environment.
And Siobhan, what's your answer to that question?
Well, I believe that stimulation and exposure is very important. As I tell my parents, very plainly, what you put in is what you're going to get out. And a lot of times people think that there's a certain age where they need to start. I say start immediately, start from the womb. Talking, music, exposure is key because, what are children going to talk about when they do start to talk? Exactly what they heard. So for me, it's about stimulating them and to just keep talking to them and just exposing them to different things.
When I was raising kids, mine are now young adults, I remember when our firstborn came home, my husband's GP said to us, no baby talk, just talk to them all the time. And so that's what we did. We literally just narrated the day all the time. We were constantly talking. I also, listened to NPR in the car and things like that. So they heard people talking all the time. And I would do things like in the grocery store, I would hold up, here's a pineapple, feel the pineapple. This is a coconut. What does it feel like? And people looked at me like I was crazy, but, it's fantastic. And I spoke with the Literacy Cooperative's director of the Imagination Library, Joan Sporrell, about this. And 2 days later, I was at the public library and there was a young mom with her little kid in the bathroom, and she was narrating the process of washing hands. And I was I didn't want to be the weird lady in the bathroom, good job, Mom. But I was secretly going, yay, good job. So I think what you were talking about is what I've always believed and what I hear from my other experts as well.
I would probably be the weird lady in the bathroom sharing
you
her
would
arm. Just
totally
keep doing that, Mom. You're right on
Good
track.
job.
That's exactly what you should be doing.
Is reading better than speaking, or listening better than seeing, or is all of it valuable?
It's all good. It's all good.
Everything is good.
In whatever form you can present language, I say do that. Whatever works, whatever is most natural, because I really believe in a naturalistic environment. That's how we learn, in our natural environment. That's how we learn best as humans. But what I do love about reading is because reading takes you to a different place. I can be at home and there are a set amount of things that might come up in a day. But when I'm reading, I can be in another country. I could even be on another planet. And just the vocabulary that would come from that would be something that just wouldn't happen. So that's another reason why I think reading that's number one on my list. If I had to give one answer
imagination,
or one word answer to the question, how can I help my child with language? It would be read. That's it.
Yeah. And I think something that's not really noted on very often about reading is sort of how you're reading to your kids. So it's not just necessarily reading what's on the page, but it's how you're reading the words. And maybe your toddler's not ready for all the words that are on the page. So you're talking about the pictures. You're talking about what they're feeling. What colors do you see? Where are they? Like Siobhan said, where in the world are they? You can talk about books in so many different ways rather than just reading what's on the page. But also, when your toddler is ready to, sit and listen and read and listen to what is written on the page, what's really important is they're getting that sentence structure. They're learning how to use vocabulary in different ways. And, we all went through this as parents, and every parent listening, I'm sure, can relate to the toddler who wants to read the same book over and over and over and over again. And that's actually really important for language development, because the more they hear it, the more they're able to absorb. They're able to absorb vocabulary, intonation, sentence structure, all those early literacy skills. It feels redundant to you, but it's so important to them.
Definitely. And to speak to your point, Tara, about, before the child is able to read, one of my favorite things to do at home and in therapy is a book walk. So basically, I may not be reading the words that are on the page, because like you said, sometimes they're not ready for all the text, but just walking through the book, or even having them read the book, looking at the pictures and kind of telling their own story. So there's so much value in that, and I really enjoy it, and so do they. The conversation that comes from that, you could never plan that. So that's kind of one of my favorite things to do as well when it comes to reading.
Yeah, and even, I feel like I could talk about reading. We could go on and on about reading forever, but things like following directions, have your toddler turn the page. Tell them,
yeah.
when it's time to turn the page or the book is all done, they can put the book away at the end. There's so many language rules and things that you can incorporate into reading that's really not just at all reading what's on the page.
Yeah, when I recently went to this fundraiser for the Literacy Cooperative, and at every place setting they had a children's book from Dolly's Imagination Library, and it was really cute. They had matching cookies too, which were incredible. But what I thought was really fascinating is they kind of have these special editions of these books, and so you open up the cover, and there's a flap, and it has age-appropriate activities that you can do with this book. So I think some of those may be exactly what you're talking about, how to walk through the book or point out, I don't know, relationships, colors, places, things. Like I just think there's so many, it's like a launch pad, right? It's not the end all be all, the book. It's a launch pad for learning.
Exactly. And you can read the same book differently every time you read it.
Yeah. So I'm going to circle back to baby talk. Siobhan, is something like Hop on Pop or the short, silly, rhymey kind of books, are they as good as or better than or worse than other books we might think are more appropriate for language acquisition?
I wouldn't say that they're better or worse than. I think the point is get the language out, to have the child exposed to the sounds. Even something like Hop on Pop, rhyming is actually something that I'd recommend very much when it comes to language, and even its correlation to literacy. We talk about phonemic awareness. Rhyming is a big part of that, and it's definitely a foundation for reading. So I would say, in whatever form you can get it, do that.
Interesting. It just popped in my mind, like that would be a fun game with a kid. Like if you say
Absolutely.
a word, think of a rhyming word.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can do that with all those books. I was going to say the same thing about rhyming. It's such an important pre-literacy skill. That's why so many books rhyme and have those cadences.
Oh, that's interesting. See, I just read it as a reader. I don't know the science behind it, so that's really interesting to me. So
it's funny that you say that, because I always say, as speech therapists, sometimes when people see our sessions, they're like, oh, you guys just play. Like, no, we play with purpose.
With purpose, yeah.
With purpose, there's always a rhyme and reason. No pun intended.
No, but
so what we're doing in
That's
therapy.
That leads me to my next question, which is, what exactly is speech language pathology? Like, does it include the physical stuff like lisps and the R's that some kids have trouble with? Um, or is it does it also include like the educational things like reading and writing and like I guess just what is it? Maybe you can help define it for our listeners.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, there's speech and there's language. So I like to start with that. So people hear speech therapy, they just think of maybe lisps or, articulation, how you make the sounds. So speech is basically how we say what we say. And then the language part is the what we're saying, the content of our speech. So it's important to understand that. And then when you go into language, you need to further understand that there are different parts of language. So most basically, there's the receptive and then there's the expressive. So the receptive would be what we understand. The expressive would be what we express. And expressing doesn't necessarily mean just talking. It could be signing. It could be gesturing. So there's a whole category, under that. So, for people to understand what we do, yes, there are some mechanical things where it comes to like how you produce sounds and words. That would be the articulation part of it. But for me personally, my favorite thing is the language. I work with a lot of toddlers that are language delayed or have language disorders, um, and we work on what they're trying to say more so than how they say it.
Yeah, and I think that there are a lot of colloquial ways to say what we do. Speech therapist, speech teacher, we sort of get it all. The real term for our job is speech language pathologist. And the reason for that, as Siobhan said, is the speech is that articulation piece, how you are moving, your actual manipulators, we call them your speech manipulators, your lips, your teeth, your tongue to make the sounds. The language, again, like Siobhan said, is what we're actually saying, which can be further broken down. And then pathologist really means that we can diagnose speech and language disorders. So it's really an all-encompassing field. And if you even want to take it a step further, we work on swallowing as well. And there's a whole other side of this that it's a very wide umbrella, the term speech language pathologist. We wear a lot of hats.
What are signs that parents should look for? And when should they get involved with an SLP?
Yeah, so early signs, you can start looking at milestones. I know that if you Google speech milestones, you're probably going to get 500 different answers, right? But what's really important to know is that by 2, your toddler should start to be using words where you're not counting them anymore. And that's probably what you're going to find across the board in these milestones. And the gap really widens from age 2 to 3 with their language. And so their vocabulary should increase to a point by 3 years old where you really can't count what they're saying anymore. And the goal is to get ahead of that before that gap really widens. So early signs are these milestones. Are they using language? Are they expressing themselves at sort of an age appropriate level? But I sort of hate to say that because it's not like they wake up on their 18-month-old birthday and they're going to start using 50 words. It's all gradual. You need to make sure that they are getting there, that they are on the upswing. And if they're not, then it's really important to reach out for early intervention, talk to your pediatrician, all of that.
It's funny you mentioned the pediatrician because, a lot of us have a hard time because when parents go in and they ask the pediatricians about their child's speech and language development, a lot of times when the parents bring this up, they are met with the wait and see suggestion from the pediatrician.
I know,
Which
I was
for us,
hesitant to say
it's
it.
almost like a four-letter word. The wait and see. What exactly are we waiting to see? We don't want to miss what we call the critical language period, where children just kind of explode with language. This is a pivotal time to get them intervention if that's what they need to succeed. So, we kind of take issue with the wait and see. In most states, you can get an evaluation at no cost to the family. You don't even have to leave your home most of the time to get one. So it's kind of like for me, a no-brainer. If you have a question, when in doubt, check it out. That's my rule of thumb and advice to parents when they have concerns about speech and language
And you
or
actually
anything.
don't need to go through the pediatrician for these
Right.
for
Right.
these evaluations. You don't necessarily need the referral. So if your gut is telling you it's not right, or you think it's maybe your first time mom, maybe you don't know, right? Check it out. I love that. When in doubt, check it out. There is absolutely no harm in getting that evaluation.
That's a Hard No is brought to you by Clever Grow Marketing, my full-service agency specializing in smart, strategic marketing solutions for businesses and nonprofits. Okay, so you're probably wondering, Heather, what's with the podcast about boundaries? Why not marketing? Well, maybe in the future, but for now, it actually does relate, so bear with me here. Smart marketing, strategic marketing, requires knowing what to say no to and why. Businesses and nonprofits get inundated with marketing options and offers every day. We help you cut through all that noise, focus on your specific needs, and develop actionable strategies that are doable and actually make sense. Whether it's websites, SEO, email, social, or traditional channels, we're experienced in all of it. So if you need help figuring out your marketing, visit our website, clevergrowmarketing.com, and get in touch. How are language and reading related from a developmental point of view? Like, let's get into the science of this.
Sure. Well, when we think of language, we want to think about listening, speaking, reading, and writing. These are the modalities that we use to express ourselves and to gain information. So you want to think of language as kind of oral language as the foundation for literacy. And usually when there's a problem with the oral language, we tend to see problems with the written and the reading. So when a child has a strong foundation in oral language, you would hope to see a stronger performance in those other areas, written and reading. So those are how those are related.
Yeah, and they start pretty early. These early literacy skills really start, earlier. In this episode, we were talking about books and reading and rhyming. These are all precursors to literacy. So, how it really starts is listening and understanding. I mentioned before, sentence structure, how to manipulate sounds, how to speak in certain cadences based on where the comma is, where is the sentence. These are all pre-literacy skills. Even things as early as recognizing the difference between a letter and a number, not being able to say it necessarily, but recognizing it. These are how to orient a book, really early skills, how to hold a book the right way. Toddlers pick this up, or they have to be taught. But these literacy skills really start quite early, much earlier than I think we recognize. We think of literacy as school aged, and they really start much, much, much younger.
It's so funny that you say that, because I have a language-based daycare program. So the children that I serve, they start as early as 6 weeks old, and they go up to about 4 or 5 right before they go to kindergarten. And many of the kids, they leave my program reading. So when they get to kindergarten, the teacher often asks, like, where did you come from? Like, how do you know all of this? And it's just that I use my background in speech, my knowledge about phonemic awareness, sound segmenting, and all of that to kind of help them to the next level. So I start, like you mentioned, recognizing letters, recognizing the difference between letters, numbers, knowing the sounds of the letters. We work on segmenting words, rhyming words, blending sounds, all of those things, which are the building blocks for reading. It makes it that much simpler for them to learn how to read. I'm always amazed, at how quickly they grasp it when, you approach it from this perspective. So it's been really helpful in my daycare with the kids that I serve. So if there was one takeaway for parents that I could give, it would be to start early. Start early. Don't ever say, oh, they're not ready for that. I say, kids are like sponges, and whatever they're going to absorb, they're going to absorb. But give it, because you just never know.
Yeah, and it's not to say start teaching them to read
Right. No.
full-length books at 2,
Right.
but you can start something that Siobhan touched on that I think a lot of parents don't realize is, kids know the ABCs. You know the ABCs. Everybody can sing the ABCs, but those aren't the sounds that the letters make, right? B doesn't say B, it says B.
Right, right.
Little things like that. Start incorporating that into your day. It doesn't need to be drill work, and it quite frankly shouldn't be any type of drill, sitting down, structured work. But you can incorporate little things like reading rhyming books and maybe a book over and over again that rhymes and leaving off that last word. See if they can fill it in. See if they recognize that it's a rhyme.
Yeah, I remember when my kids were little, we would read the same, like you were talking before, certain kids love certain books. And, The Very Hungry Caterpillar was a big hit in my house, and Moo Ba La 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 was another one. And if we read it wrong, even before they were literate, they would be like, no, that's not how it goes. Like, they know, and they will let you know if you need to go back and read it the correct way. So, and I'm also remembering my oldest, before he could read, he did pick up on, because we were always reading and talking and doing things, he did know the sounds that different letters make. So we would be driving in the car and he would see a Jeep go by and he'd say, "There's a peach." And we were like, is he reading? How does he know those are the sounds? But he's doing it backwards. And at first I was alarmed, and then I thought, no, he just hasn't figured out how to put it together yet, but he's figured out the sounds. And so to this day we call them peaches in our family. So it's interesting how that brain development is happening all the time. And it also makes me think of what Joan at the Literacy Cooperative was saying, why Dolly's library sends these books starting at birth, is because it's so fundamental to, that brain development.
Yeah, and it's also important to be curious with your toddler. See if you can sort of get back to your toddler days, if you will. So, like, for example, I have a 3.5-year-old, and sometimes he'll ask me, he doesn't quite ask it the right way, but he's asking me, what letter does her name start with? He says, like, what letter is hers, or something, something along those lines. But he's asking, what is the letter that Heather starts with? And so you can go into and what the letter is, what the sound makes, but you don't have to wait for them to ask that. You can ask it to them when, they're starting to recognize letters. I wonder what else starts with p, the p sound, p, 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 and do it that way. Be curious with them.
Yeah. Siobhan, what are some more practical things people can do at home to encourage reading and language development?
Well, the first thing I would say is to make sure you're having fun. Like Tara mentioned, you want to make it as fun as possible, not just for them, but for you. So I spend a lot of my day on the floor playing and being just as silly as I want to be. I feel like I don't work a day in my life, in this profession, because it's so much fun, to be honest. Not just with the children in my daycare, but with my own children. I like to be curious with them, like you mentioned, being curious, asking questions, answering questions. A lot of times, they don't quite have the words for the questions. So sometimes you can help them by posing those questions that you kind of see the little puzzled look in their eyes, what they may be thinking, and just kind of give them the words. Sometimes that's very necessary. If you're doing something and you can, call out the vocabulary, you can ask questions, you can answer your own questions, to begin with, just so that they can start to think about those things and hear the language and the structure and what comes along with all the things that they do throughout their day. So I would say narrating and asking questions is a good way to start. Not asking questions like, third degree. We don't want them to be stressed out. We don't want this to be a stressful thing.
Yeah.
But just kind of
questions that they can somehow answer.
That they can answer. And even if they can't answer it, maybe you ask and answer, just as a model,
Yeah. And one thing I like to do, because I think we can get into like a cycle where you're really asking too many questions,
Yes.
is to use the phrase "I wonder" instead of a direct question. So if you're
Yes.
walking outside and you see a flower, you pick it up and you say, "Oh, I wonder what this smells like." And you take it up to your nose and you smell it and you give it to your toddler's nose. Your turn, you smell it, and you're again making them curious, and you're asking these questions without the pressure of a question. Oh, I wonder what that sound was.
So
Or
it's more like you're discovering things together.
Together.
exactly,
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's fun.
exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I Tala, I saw your social media. I was looking through your Instagram and I saw a post about a cup. Like, here's 5 things you can talk about or activities you can do with a cup to
Mhm.
encourage language development. You want to tell us about that?
Sure. Cups are my favorite toys. You don't have to go out of your way to get them at all. They're in your
Right.
house. You can use them so many ways to teach language. So, my kids, they're obsessed with water. They're obsessed with pouring and being in the bath. So, I have tried almost every bath toy in the book. They only want cups. And so, we work on pour, we work on fill up the cup, the play development schema of pouring and that transportation of liquids. These are all really important skills that I tell parents it might get a little messy. So I like to do it in the bath. If you're triggered by mess, go right into the bathtub. But things you can be silly with a cup. Put it on your head. Put the cup on your head, and now it's a hat. And put it on your toddler's head, and now it's a hat, and you can teach the word hat. Um, Put it on your head and pretend to sneeze, and then the cup goes flying. It's hilarious. They love it. There are so many things if you just put out cups, what you can do. You can make a
Yeah.
drum. You can stack them up. I mean,
Yeah.
I could talk about it forever, but
I'm like,
yes.
as you're talking, I'm seeing memories play in my head. And my number one parenting advice to all parents is if a toddler or a little kid's cranky, put them in water, like either a
Mm,
bath or out in the pool or in a sprinkler, something that just changes everything. And then, two, I remember we had this set of cups that and they had numbers on them and they
mhm.
gradated in size from 1 to 12. And those things stuck around for a really long time and went from kid to kid, and they loved them. We used them for
Mhm.
all kinds of things. And you're right, there was stacking and pouring and building and sorting and color matching and numbers and all kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, a cup is super important for so many things, but it also grows with your toddler. So maybe your toddler's at the phase where they love knocking things over. So you stack up the cups and they knock them over. It's triggering, it's annoying, but it is an important developmental phase for them to go through.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're a little bit older and they're building their own towers and they want, I don't know, a silo on the side. So they put the cup upside down and it becomes a silo. There's so many cups really grow with your kids. I never
Yeah.
thought I'd be talking so much about cups, but they're great.
Siobhan, do you have a favorite activity that you advise parents to do with their kids?
Well, it would depend on the age group, but I actually have one of my favorites right here. I don't go anywhere without him.
I noticed him.
Mr.
I
Potato
did
Love
Head.
him.
I got the big boy right here.
Yeah.
I love Mr. Potato Head. We've been together over 20 years now. This Potato Head here, but it's excellent for the little ones when you're trying to teach them body parts, and not
Yeah.
just the parts that it comes with. You can go over. Like, I put him to sleep. I have him jump. We dance. We do a lot with Mr. Potato Head. So, like, I would always say to parents, try to think outside the box. And I love how you put it, Tala. Be curious. Like, just because this is Mr. Potato Head and it comes with, eyes, nose, mouth, like, there's so much more that you can do with it. So, just have fun with it. And I would also say, don't be afraid to get messy. Like, childhood is messy. For some of us, it's triggering more than others.
Mm-hmm.
But, like we mentioned, that we also talk about feeding and swallowing. That's another thing that we do as speech pathologists. So a lot of times I'll see children who are, their feeding skills are not necessarily age appropriate because it gets too messy. And I'm like, you have to be okay with that, because this is the only way that they're going to learn how to self feed. by making the mess. So
Mhm.
close your eyes, lay down a plastic, do whatever you need to do. But, part of it is going to get messy. And I feel like the best learning happens in the mess, in the chaos at times, to
Mhm.
an extent,
Mhm.
right? So you just have to be comfortable with being curious, getting messy, and just kind of bringing yourself down to their level. I feel like that's how we can reach children the best, by bringing ourselves down to their level.
Yeah. And I am a speech pathologist. I work with kids all day long. I have two toddlers at home. I am still triggered by messes. And I think that's what the bathtub is for. If you live in a warm place, go outside. But
Mhm.
Siobhan's right. You have to sort of embrace the mess with
Yeah.
kids. And there are ways to do it that are easier on your anxiety.
So I'm an trained fine artist, and so I always had art supplies in our house. And my youngest actually just graduated from art school and grew up just making the messes with all my stuff. So I got over that real fast. There's whole walls that are hidden with furniture that have paint on them, and just
Mm-hmm.
mess in my house. But the other thing that involved mess was I did a lot of cooking with my kids, and I started them really young, and I got them safety knives like for little kids, and that's another opportunity where you can talk about foods and measurements and the processes of mixing and all the things and colors and how things taste, um what different spices do, like, and to this now they're like very accomplished cooks and bakers. So that is nice because literally there's a big thing of cookies on my kitchen table right now that my kid baked me yesterday. But but I also feel like they got life skills out of it, but I also thought that was an opportunity, like just to be together and do something fun. And we would, how do you read a recipe? What is the difference between a teaspoon and a tablespoon? And like, honestly, my kids have friends who are their age who don't know that, and like don't know how to cook for themselves. So I don't know. I just thought when we're talking about messes and teaching and at home, that's to me another good opportunity.
Yeah, we bake
Definitely.
constantly. My it's not a side hustle anymore. It used to be a side hustle, was baker. I used to be a baker. I made cakes and I decorated cakes, and baking has always been a huge part of my life. My 3.5-year-old has gotten like really great at mixing without making a mess, but there are so many
Impressive.
ways to it is very impressive, but there are so many ways to, like you mentioned, model language, but also if we're going back to early literacy skills, sequencing is a really
Oh,
important
steps. Yeah, yeah,
literacy
yeah,
skill,
yeah.
following step by step. Here's what you do first, and break it down second and third. And a fun activity that I like to do or have parents do with their kids is make rainbow um, kebabs with fruit. And so it helps sequence because a lot of kids know the rainbow already. And it's fruit, so it's easy. And it's just a kebab stick and they just put it on, and but it's first the red, then orange, then yellow. It's all these sequencing skills. So it's sort of cooking, but also just a good, like you mentioned, a good way to teach language.
I love that.
Yeah.
So, what are some common myths you two run into about speech and language acquisition pathology? I guess I'll start with Siobhan. What are common
Uh,
myths?
One of the myths that I often hear is about the disparity between boys and girls in terms of speech delays. That boys tend to be late talkers. That's a big one that I often hear people saying. Um, yeah,
That's it's not based on fact at all. I think um, I'm a little bit biased because I have two toddler boys, but they do not, based on any research, talk later than girls. If it is slightly later, and I use later in really big quotes, it's still within the developmental norm range.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell parents, don't discount your little boys, don't let them slide because they're boys.
So when you
They
say
should
that, you
be.
mean like don't say, well, that's normal because he's a boy.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you see a delay, get it addressed.
Yeah,
immediately.
definitely.
Yeah, yeah.
There's no research to support that boys talk any later than girls.
Okay. What else?
Another big one is, and I think, Siobhan, do you speak two languages, if I remember
I
correctly?
do. I
But
do.
that speaking two languages or multiple languages causes a language delay. It does not.
Does not.
There's no
I've
research to
heard people
support
say
that.
don't teach your kid baby sign language because there's baby sign you can do right along as you're teaching them words, right? And sometimes they can acquire that faster than spoken language, but some people say don't do that because they'll lean on it and not speak. Is that correct?
No,
No,
Okay.
no.
not at all.
Usually, when I come in and I'm with a family and I have a toddler that's not, speaking yet, there's often a lot of frustration. Sometimes parents will report behavior issues because, I mean, think about it. A lot of times these children have great receptive language skills and the delays in the expressive. So imagine you know exactly what you want, you understand what's happening, but you just can't express. That's going to lead you to be pretty frustrated. So, I like to go in and give them a way to communicate. Just even if it is a sign, just something to let the caretaker know I need something. You I see immediately, almost immediately when they have a way to say, "Hey, I need something." The frustration comes down just even if it's just a little bit, we'll take it, right? As parents, we'll take it. So I do start with sometimes give me or more just to give them a way to communicate. And we work. It's a process. Nothing is going to happen overnight in speech therapy or in life in general, right? So it's a process. We start with the sign, we give them away. And, my focus in the beginning is often teaching them that language is an exchange. You give something, you get something, right? Whether it's a sign, a word, a gesture. A lot of times children don't have that. They don't come knowing that. Especially when they're in a type of situation where they may have someone anticipating their needs. Oh, it's 12 o'clock. He needs a bottle. Here's the bottle. Even if you know that it's 12 o'clock and it's milk time, you want milk, you ask the questions, give them a sign for milk. Just give them a way to communicate. So I am for the signs, for the early signs, just to give that child a way to express themselves and lessen their frustration.
Yeah, and we always, as speech pathologists, pair the word with the
Right.
sign, always. And the idea is that they drop the sign. It's easier to talk once they get the hang of it. And they
Exactly.
know this. They're not going to rely on the sign. But the reason you teach signs first, like Siobhan mentioned, is it's a quick, easy, effective way to start communicating. And we want effective communication. And gross motor skills, like learning these signs, gross motor skills precede fine motor skills. Speech and talking is a fine motor skill. That's why all of these songs have dances that go along with them or movements, the wheels on the bus, because imitating these gross motor movements is actually a precursor to speaking. It comes first. So that's why kids pick up signs faster than they'll pick up spoken language.
That's fascinating. Siobhan, earlier you talked about um, not not necessarily listening to a doctor that says let's wait and see. What are some other boundaries parents should put in place to best support their kids who may be struggling with speech or language development?
In my experience, I find that a lot of times well-meaning family members may intervene when you, as a parent, have a feeling or an inclination that something may be going on with your child's development, whether it be speech or some other modality. Sometimes the issue may be cultural. Sometimes it just may be a lack of understanding or awareness of what developmental delays are. Met with countless parents who've been discouraged from having their children evaluated for fear of them being labeled.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just say, if you think something is going on, have the child evaluated.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't hurt. It
And
doesn't
put
hurt.
boundaries around who you're listening to and
Right.
trust your own.
Trust yourself. Trust your
Yeah.
your instincts as a parent. Yeah.
How about you,
Yeah.
Tala?
I mean, trusting your gut is the number one thing I tell parents. Nobody knows your child better than you. And we mentioned it earlier. If you have any concern, anything, probably your first gut is to ask a family member, ask a friend, then maybe the pediatrician, But if something is still not sitting right with you, just go to a professional. There is nothing wrong with it. More parents need to really follow their gut, because by the time they get to me, and I say this to parents all the time, I've never had a parent once regret starting to learn how to help their child speak earlier.
Right.
But I have had countless parents come to me regretting that they started too late.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no reason to not follow your gut. Again, you know your toddler better than anyone else.
Right.
And if something's not right, even from the pediatricians are very well-meaning. They're generalists. There's a reason that speech pathologists exist. There's a reason that physical therapists exist, occupational, any specialist.
Right.
Just go find one.
Yeah. And I'll remind our listeners who are here in the Northeast Ohio region, if you're wondering how to find a speech language pathologist, there's an organization called Connecting for Kids, and they have an amazing online resource database. And there may be other organizations like that around the country. I don't really know. Or you could just, Google speech language pathologist near me. What certifications should people look for? Are there specific ones?
Well, we're
There are.
licensed professionals, and we also have clinical competence through our governing body, which is ASHA, the American Speech
So
and
you'll
Hearing
look
Association.
you'll look for the letters either MA, CCC, SLP, or MS, which just means you have your master's, CCC, SLP.
Okay, great. That's good to know. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I really cannot wait to put this out because so many parents are going to benefit from this advice, and by extension, their kids. So I want to give you a chance to tell people about your practices and how they can find you. Siobhan, why don't you go first?
I can be found on Instagram at Listen, Learn, Talk. And I have a program. It's actually an online course for parents to teach them how to do all of the things that we mentioned today, how they can help their children at home.
Fantastic. And for both of you, we'll put links, of course, on our website on our show notes so people can find you. Tala, your turn.
Sure. So you can find me on Instagram at Hershey Speech Coach. Hershey, like the chocolate, but no relation, unfortunately, Speech Coach. And I coach parents of toddlers to learn the same strategies that we do. There's such a huge shortage of therapists and long wait lists, and there's so much that you can be doing at home. And so that's my goal, is to train you to learn everything that I do and Siobhan does and all the other speech therapists do at home to stop waiting.
I just want to add to that, Tala. I think that's very important, that parents realize the importance of coaching. Speech therapy is not just about the child. It's about the entire family. Because in my over 20 years of doing this, the children that progress towards meeting their goals the fastest are the ones who have parents that are involved, who know what we're doing and why we're doing it. So that is key. You want to see your child progress faster, get involved.
Learn the skills. You could be doing it 50 plus hours a week with your child versus once a week for 30 minutes.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's not a hard thing you have to set appointment time for. It's something you can weave into your natural day-to-day life.
Yes,
every day.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love it. Thank you so much, ladies. This has been a phenomenal conversation. And like I said, I think this is going to help a lot of families. And
I hope so.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time. That's a Hard No is a production of Clever Girl Marketing, my little agency in Cleveland, in partnership with our friends at Evergreen Podcasts. Many thanks to our amazing team, including Maura Del Rosario, our production and marketing coordinator, Noah Fouts, our amazing producer, editor, and composer who wrote our theme music and performed it with his band, The Big Leagues, and our new video producer and editor, Kay Holmberg. You can find show notes and resources on our website, and you can find other fun stuff on our socials. We're Hard No Podcast. Find your no, then say it with me.